I'm Jeff Sutherland here to talk about Scrum at Scale. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the person that started the first Scrum in 1993 and have rolled it out to the world. And now we're rolling out Scrum at Scale. And basically what we're trying to do is install a new operating system in organizations. That's the goal. There's a number of new books that will come out that I'll talk about. This whole idea of running an organization with an operating system that has been proven really to work well in building software got a big lift back in 2006 when I began working with a venture capital firm. And they had decided that they were going to use Scrum to double the return on investment compared to other VCs. And as soon as we started training people in the investment companies, the venture capital firm realized Scrum is an operating system that we should use to run our venture firm. And so now they've been doing that for 13 years. And a lot of the learnings have been now brought into industry. And just in 2018, we have many rounds of funding, but just the most recent round of $200 million. Last year, the valuation of that went from $200 million to $500 million. So we could do a lot better than double the returns. This is the average across almost 50 companies. This is not, the one-shot kind of way of working. So we think that this is the solution to the disruptions going on. A lot of people, the change in technology-driven disruption is faster now than people's minds can think up with it. So for recently, the banks in Germany were complaining. They said, Amazon's doing loans in Germany, and they can figure out the risk of a loan in 3 seconds and deliver a loan in 3 minutes, and it takes us 3 weeks. It's game over. We're exiting the business. I was working with the management at Amazon in Seattle a while back, and I learned they have 3,300 Scrum teams. They're all 2-pizza teams. You can feed them with 2 pizzas. And they deliver something new to the market more than once every second. And as a result, when Amazon decides to go into a domain, for example, they acquire Whole Foods, what happens to all the supermarket stocks? They tank immediately, the very day, okay? And it's because of the ability to move really quickly. I worked with Maersk recently, the biggest shipping company in the world. I said, what's your biggest problem? They said, Amazon, they're buying airplanes. And then I read that Amazon was leasing all the ships between the US and China as well. So really disruptive to Maersk. I'm a great Tesla fan, okay? So in the future, and the future is not that far away because the AI is writing the autonomous vehicle code. I don't know if you know that. And it is eating the code right now. And the humans, all they do is they frame and tag stuff. That's what we're going to do in the future. And the AI is going to do all the programming. So more than a year or two ago, Google said over 50% of their code is done by an AI. Wind and solar are cheaper than alternative forms of energy. It's getting so cheap. I have solar on my roof. All my electricity is free. I have 3 Teslas. They all run off the roof. The heat runs off the roof. Everything runs off the roof. And they pay me energy credits for having my solar on the roof. So my accountant said, Jeff, you're in the energy business now. You're going to have to pay tax. And now they said, you're going to get energy credits for the geothermal system that you have. I mean, I'm going to get enough to buy all my cars just in the energy credits I have every year. So my cars are free, the electricity is free. A lot of people don't understand that. That's the world today, okay? You ought to be able to do that in the UK. So there's tremendous disruption going on, and that's causing organizations to want to transform the way they do business, the way they run the business. And since software is eating everything, the way they use software, and a lot of the transformations fail. Recent Forbes article almost half of them fail, and the MIT Sloan Review looked at failures and found that 75% of them are terminal. That means the company goes out of business, is acquired, or goes out of business. And the tooling that they're using for these transformations is about 80% Scrum. It's always been that way. And the companies that are spreading Scrum across the organization, you probably can't read the small print there, but the more Scrum goes out into domains outside of software, into the finance, into the marketing, into the sales, into the legals, HR, the more it does that, the bigger the leadership of the company in the marketplace. I had somebody formerly from Apple in one of my classes last week. They said, Jeff, they do Scrum exactly as you specify. That's why Apple's so successful. Probably didn't know that because they're really secretive about, I only hear it like, I hear sidebars from people who work there who come into my classes and they talk to me about what's going on. So in the Agile world, how many of you are working on an Agile team in this organization? Most of you, okay. It's not a pretty sight out there because the data on hundreds of thousands of projects in the world show that 42% of them have happy customers and good delivery, but 50% the customers are unhappy because they're late, they're over budget, and the quality of what they deliver is not what the customer wants. And this problem has become so big for the U.S. Department of Defense. It is the law in the United States that all defense projects that are IT projects must be Agile. So every vendor is submitting an Agile proposal. And they created a Defense Innovation Board with distinguished computer people. For example, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and many other famous personalities that you might know. Eric Lander is somebody who founded the Broad Institute. Those are the CRISPR people. Those are the people that are going to be reprogramming your babies, right? They're using Scrum, okay? It's really one of the best Scrum implementations in Cambridge, where my headquarters is. He's on the board. And they looked at all these proposals. They said, we need to write a document that distinguishes the project proposals that are Agile and the ones that are Agile BS. Now, I don't know in the UK what the term for BS is, but you probably know what it is in the United States. And the ones that are Agile BS, they go to the trash can, okay? So they have a series of about 20 questions that are asked. I'll just mention the first one. Can you deliver working product every sprint, including the first sprint? Okay. People are always asking me about sprint 0. That's Agile BS. There is no sprint 0, okay? Ken and I have been saying that for 20 years, but nobody believes us. I'm working on updating the Scrum Guide right now with Ken. And one of the major changes in it, I finally, after 10 years, convinced Ken that Scrum is useful for any work, anywhere, in any domain. And so the Scrum Guide is going to be changed at the front end. We're going to remove the term developer from developer team. It's going to be a team, and it's going to apply to any domain of work. And there are some other very interesting things that are evolving out of that. And it's because, although Ken's business has been primarily focused on software, I've been primarily focused on moving Scrum outside of software. His business is being impacted by his customers say, hey, we need to use Scrum well beyond software. And a few years ago, people come to me like Arve Jacobson, the inventor of use cases, use stories, rational unified process, UML, all that kind of stuff. Now he has the international standard for defining methodologies. So he came to me and he said, hey, we should write a set of cards in the methodology standard framework of Scrum, which we did. Earlier this week, we were speaking together. And so we've done that for the Scrum Guide, and now we're doing it for Scrum at Scale. And the reason we have Scrum at Scale is that the leadership, Agile leadership at Intel came to me and they said, you know, at Intel, we learned how to put 4 billion transistors on a chip. And in order to do it, you have to have a scale-free architecture where every component is the same as every other component. You can plug and play. It's fractal in nature. And none of these scaling frameworks are like that. Jeff, you need to fix that because the scaling frameworks don't scale, okay? So under pressure, I started writing down how we do it because I've done a lot. And so we look at the framework from multiple components, how they're running, both from the product owner's point of view and the prioritization, and also on the teams and how they're functioning. How well are they removing impediments? How well are they coordinating? How well are they deploying? And so forth. And so we work with understanding for an organization how these pieces are functioning. They're like the systems in an organization that make it work. And if we can analyze these systems, help these systems improve, scale up these systems, we can get much better results. A lot of people think scaling is just the number of teams, but we went into a project in Toyota last year. It had 200 people on it for 5 years, and they delivered nothing. So we said, who do we really need? It was 20 people. They delivered in 6 months. The system that pays commissions to dealers for selling Toyotas, pretty important system. What's the difference in the scale of velocity? 20 people, 6 months, deliver 100%, compared to 200 people, 5 years, deliver nothing. Velocity is infinitely scalable, right? And so that's one of the major aspects that I'm focused on with Scrum at Scale. And also saturation across the organization is critical. People ask me, what's the scale for your architecture? Well, the operational aspects of Scrum come from my work as a fighter pilot. I spent 11 years as a fighter pilot in the Air Force. And the fighter pilot training is all based on the OODA loop of John Boyd, Colonel John Boyd, which is now the basis of the strategy and the way the U.S. Marines operate. And in every war college, his strategy is taught. And that is an agile way of engagement which is embodied in Scrum. But the theory of operation of Scrum came from my last tour in the Air Force was at the Air Force Academy as a professor of mathematics, and then I was doing a PhD program in the nearest medical school, and they hired me away from the Air Force, and I spent 11 years doing cancer research, mathematically modeling the human cell on the supercomputer, and trying to figure out how does a cell change and become a malignant cell, and how can you change it back into a normal cell? And so those systemic changes of complex biological system, that's my training, that's my background, that's my PhD. And that model is the basis of the design of Scrum. How it works is designed to be an experiment where the Scrum Master is in charge of helping to make a small change every day and a bigger change every sprint, and evaluating the result, and then backing things that don't work out and moving new improvements in constantly. Okay, it's based on biological systems theory, and in a human system, we know a paper was recently written on the number of cells in your body, and you have, on the average, 35 trillion cells in your body. And you're here tonight. Some of you are hearing what I'm saying. And that means we can scale 35 trillion. And if we applied Scrum to 35 trillion people, and we designed it the way the human body is designed, it would work. So we could run this part of the galaxy with Scrum. It's not a problem. But you have to put it together in the right way, or it will never work. Recently, Jim Johnson, the CEO of the Standards Group that has all this data on hundreds of thousands of projects, came to me. He said, I spent 3 years trying to figure out why Scrum works, and I finally figured it out. The most important data item for whether a project will be successful is how fast the decisions get made. If they get made fast, the success rate is almost 60%, and if they get made slow, the success rate is below 20%. And that difference is bigger between Agile than the difference between Agile and Waterfall. So he says a fast deciding Waterfall will be better than a slow deciding Agile team. That's what his data shows. Okay, so we need to build a scaling framework that enables really high-speed decisions. So that means we need to push decisions down to the teams as much as possible. They can turn around in 10 minutes. We need transparency, inspecting and adapting. We need product owners tightly coupled to the teams. They can turn around a priority decision in less than an hour. We need leadership teams meeting every day in a Scrum meeting, fixing major issues in a few hours every day. And we're beginning to build up the cards for the pieces of Scrum at Scale that will describe, just like we use the Scrum Guide to describe Scrum, we want the same kind of guide for Scrum at Scale. And in that guide, we need to have the minimal framework. The Scrum Guide is the minimal set of stuff that you need to get it working really well. And we need the same thing at Scale. And so at Scale, we say we need the minimum viable bureaucracy, the minimum structure that you need to avoid slowing things down. And that structure needs to consist of nothing but Scrum teams. There can be no other model. And we know we need a structure that will have multiple teams deliver something together in common. We're calling that the Scrum of Scrums. They meet every day if they're working together to deliver a shippable increment of product at the end of a sprint. So in Scrum at Scale, the Scrum of Scrums is the delivery team. They have a shippable increment of product, just like a Scrum team is supposed to have. And we need, at the enterprise level, since 80% of the impediments in a typical new Scrum team are organizational impediments, there needs to be a leadership team that removes them. How many of you have a leadership team that's responsible for managing the Agile implementation and removing any impediments that the teams can remove themselves? Like about 3 people in the room, okay? That does not scale, okay? You have got to fix that. That's one of the major messages of Scrum at Scale. So we need, for larger implementations, we need a chief product owner that can work with product owner teams to put together the one backlog at the high level that flows down into the teams, into their sprint backlogs. And at the top of the organization, we need a enterprise prioritization team. We call it Enterprise Meta Scrum team that prioritizes for the whole organization. Because we found in company after company, even in really good companies like Toyota, GE, and 3M, as soon as we prioritize every initiative in an enterprise, the bottom 30% is work that should never be done. It's dark work. So we need a structure that can clear out the work that is actually going against the success of the organization. This model leads to this kind of structure. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it in detail, but teams are structured in product groups. Specific products have sets of teams that are delivering them. They may be big groups, they may be small groups. They can be of any size. And looking at these companies is very interesting, the model. Now, the way we work with executives at Scrum at Scale, we talk about Moneyball. Moneyball is a book and a movie about baseball. And the Oakland A's hired a statistician because they were losing all their games. And the statistician said, the runs in baseball are scored primarily by people who can just get to first base. Those home run hitters do some, but they're very expensive. And they don't do most of them. So don't hire them. Only hire people that can get to first base. Within 1 year, they were #2 in the league in wins, and their salaries were significantly less than average. My team in Boston, the Red Sox, tried to hire the manager. He wouldn't move to Boston, so they got their own statistician. That's how they won the World Series for the first time in 80 years in 2004, playing Moneyball. So here's the Moneyball of Scrum for all you Agile people. If you prioritize the entire enterprise initiatives, 30% you will find on the average. We had an IT services company that did this, and they found that the bottom 30% of the work was Windows 7 support. And they said, we don't need to do that. In one afternoon, they freed up 300 people. I mean, it's amazing. People always tell me, oh, we have so much work, we don't have enough people. And they're sitting on top of a third of their people doing stuff they don't need to be doing. And if they just sit down and prioritize, they can fix that in one afternoon. Now, when you look at the rest, we've known for many years in software, we're seeing the same thing in hardware. 2/3 of the features that are built are never or rarely used by the user. So in Scrum, the product owner's, one of the primary jobs of the product owner is to stop building stuff that isn't used. At the top, the 25% that is actually used by the customer, the Scrum Masters need to deliver that really fast with very high quality. So if you look at the Scrum Masters, one of the things we've learned from working with Toyota, process efficiency is the central metric in the Toyota way. And the people we working with Toyota, we're not doing that well, so we started saying, okay, we're going to use your metric, process efficiency. Process efficiency is the time, actual real work time for a piece of work divided by the clock time it takes to get it done. And that data is all sitting, how many are using Jira? Almost everybody, right? That data is sitting there in Jira. The data you need to calculate the process efficiency of your Scrum team. Does anybody know the process efficiency of your Scrum team? No. The data is all sitting there. I told an Indian team, take that data out of the Scrum tool, put it on your screen. They did that. It took them a couple of days to get that, a script written so that it would appear. Then they started the next sprint. They called me up on Thursday. They did a 2-week sprint. The first Thursday they called me up, they said, we run out of backlog. Everything's done. We don't know what to do. We're going to have to go talk to our manager and figure out what should we be doing. And I laughed and I said, I told you this was going to happen. Where's your product owner with extra backlog? And now I said, what's your process efficiency? Yeah, they said we started, it was down below 10%, whereas most Scrum teams are. To be lean, you have to be at least 25%. But they got it to 80% in 3 days. I said, how did you do that? They said, we put 3 people on every story. So that metric is so powerful, and it is so easy. A brand new team can fix it in 3 days, and nobody is looking at the data. Is there any Scrum Master here that will go back to work and actually look at that? A couple, I hope. If not, maybe the managers should start taking an interest in this, right? Because maybe you're more interested in performance. Well, the biggest problem we have in scalability of organizations today is, despite the fact that overwhelmingly most organizations are thinking about or trying to execute an Agile transformation, most of these Agile transformations are still run by waterfall managers. So they want the Agile groups to float up to them all their waterfall reporting, right? Now, the problem with that is that it makes things slow. But even more important, Professor Carter at Harvard, the leading change guy, has written many books. In one of his more recent books, Exchange, he points out he's never seen an Agile transformation that was sustainable with waterfall management in charge of it. So that means all the waterfall-led Agile transformations are doomed unless they fix it. So Scrum at Scale is a fix. They would just look at it and implement it. It shows you how to fix it. And there are many companies that have fixed this. Microsoft embarked on this in 2005. They had both Ken and I in there consulting them. And they've done quite a good job of transforming that company. And this past year, they are, depending on which day it is, the most valuable company in the world. And they were a company several years ago that people said, well, they're old, they're going to go by the wayside. Well, it didn't happen because they executed a Scrum at Scale model. Same thing, I heard, as I said, I'm hearing at Apple the same thing is going on. SAP has 2,000 Scrum teams implementing Scrum at Scale. Amazon is 3,300. Salesforce, Spotify, many companies are able to do this. And you can tell they're doing it because the product owners are driving the backlog and the managers have moved it to the side and they're supporting the Agile implementation. They're doing what's needed for the Agile teams to be successful. Okay. This is just the way you can take, this is the example of, I said 20 people, 30 people, that's an error there. This is an example of when we prioritized everything in Toyota America, there were 324 projects. And we started working at the top, and it was ones that provided the dealer commissions. And Toyota is actually really good at at booting up cross-functional teams. They have a long history of doing that in building new cars and stuff like that. So it wasn't hard to actually get the team set up, and with 20 people we're working with a really strong product owner, split them into 3 Scrum teams, run them as a Scrum at Scale implementation, and deliver. This model was first prototyped in 1983. I spent 11 years in the medical school doing cancer research, and then a banking company came by and they said, Jeff, you have all the knowledge on certain technologies we're using in the bank, particularly for rolling out automated teller machines, cash machines, and we're having a lot of problems. Why don't you come and be the head of technology for our banking company? 150 banks they were running. And they made me an offer that my wife couldn't refuse. So I wind up as their vice president for technology. And as I'm working on the new technology, I'm watching what's going on in the bank. And I had a bunch of the lead programmers that were working on really interesting stuff. But most of the programmers were working on these COBOL applications that we use in the bank. You write COBOL programs? Any COBOL programmers in here? There's still a lot of COBOL and Zurich. Thousands of people still writing COBOL and Zurich. But I noticed their projects were always late. So I went down on the floor and I noticed when the projects were late, the managers were having more meetings and more reports, and it was getting later. So I went into the CEO's office. I said, Ron, have you noticed all your projects are late? And he said, yeah, every morning at least 4 CIOs of the banks call me up and they scream at me. And I said, well, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And in fact, since I'm a mathematician and computer scientist, I looked at one of those Gantt charts with 1,000 tasks on it, and I calculated the probability that one of those would be late and make the project late. And that probability is 0.99999. You are virtually certain. That Gantt chart was invented before World War I by the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, and they have not upgraded it since. It is completely the wrong tool to manage your project. So he said, well, what should I do? I said, well, you need to install a new operating system. We can't do it for the whole company at once. So let's take the worst business unit, the one that's bleeding the most red ink, and I'll show you how to get that really performing. But I need everyone, sales, marketing, support, installations, and the software guys. And I'll pull them together, break them down into small teams, 4 or 5, I'll have the product marketing people coming in every Monday, prioritizing everything they're doing. And on Friday afternoon, they will be live. Whatever they have, it will be deployed every Friday. And he said, well, that's going to be a big headache compared to the fun of the new technology. I said, I don't care. This bank needs to be fixed. He said, okay, you got it. So we got them all together, and I said, I'm going to train you just like I train fighter pilots. I used to fly the F-4 in this. And new fighter pilots, you know, they came down final approach. They need to be on the glide path. They're often too high, and so they have to come around and practice again. And they keep on practicing and practicing until they can nail it and slam that plane right on the end of the runway. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to throw away the Gantt chart. I'm going to give you the Burndown chart. This is in 1983. We got the Burndown chart. And it took them 6 one-week sprints to be able to land the project. But once they could do that, the revenue started to flow. Within 6 months, they became the most profitable business unit in the bank. And the leadership said, Jeff, you guys are making most of the money for the bank. Here's another $20 million to throw at more Scrum. We didn't have the word Scrum then. They didn't know what it is. $20 million more of that stuff. Go ahead, go for it. So that was the first prototype of Scrum at scale. And we now use that in companies. So one of the companies I helped back a few years ago, Pegasystems, a publicly traded company, we came in and we started, they had a really charismatic leader, a guy like Steve Jobs running the company, and he said, we've got to go all Scrum. I said, we're going to come in and build a small set of teams, running it really well, a reference model like we do in Scrum at scale. But because of the nature of the company, within 2 months, every team across the world, hundreds of teams, and more than half of them were in India, all were doing Scrum. And as we started running around the world tuning up these teams and trying to keep them working because they hadn't had much training and stuff, the stock price went up 400%. Then the company started acquiring other companies. You know, when your stock goes up 400%, then you start buying other people. They got distracted. And then I kept on telling them, you're not done yet. And for about 3 years, their stock price was flat. And finally they said, Jeff, you need to come in and talk to our product owner team. And I come in, and you can see at the end of that chart, I came in, and then the stock price went up another 400%. So that's what Scrum at Scale is designed to do. It's not just, it is giving developers a better life. It is giving the customers a better product. But it's making the organization more successful, more profitable, and if it's publicly traded, the stock goes up, okay? So you get direct impact, direct results from implementing it properly. So we have not only written the Scrum at Scale guide, but we started a subsidiary of my company, a joint venture with the Scrum Alliance, to certify people in Scrum at Scale, also certified trainers to training people. We have about 100 trainers all over the world now doing Scrum at Scale training. We've got a new book out that has lots of case studies in Scrum at Scale. We have on our website, one of the goals for the Scrum Alliance was to make it open source, just like Scrum, everything public, everything visible. So all the trainers have to put their case studies up on the web, free for everyone so that everybody can see how to do it. I just finished today, this afternoon, a 2-day course where we work with multiple companies who have leaders coming in, and they build a picture of their company in a heat map on the wall. And this is a picture of it. Every column is a different company. And the rows are the components of Scrum at Scale. And the colors show how well they're working. And green is really good and red is really bad. So you can see it's a bit of a mess out there. We need to clean it up. We need all of your help. If any of you are interested, I'm heading from here to Amazon. We'll be doing some training next week. We're also going to be doing a train the trainer session all week, and it'll be awesome. So those are my comments for tonight. The world is being disrupted by AI, voice, robotics, and you're going to need Scrum at Scale to have your business survive, keep your families fed, and have more fun at the end of the day, right? So that's the goal. So any questions? Maybe a few questions before we end tonight? You have a mic for her? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to know what your opinion is of where psychological safety sits in everything you said, or in Scrum, or the application of Scrum. Or,
okay.
Yeah,
so,
thanks.
you know, in the first Scrum book, Ken Schwaber wrote a chapter on where does Scrum really work really well, and he came up with the Scrum values. And so openness. So how do you get people to be open? So in my company, in a retrospective every week, we do 1 week sprints. Every team, they want this. They just keep doing it. We've been doing it for almost 10 years right now. It starts off by, how do you feel about your job? How do you feel about the company? How do you feel about the team? What will make you feel better? Then we look at all the things that would make people feel better, and we pick the one thing that will make the whole team feel the most better, and that is the process improvement that goes in the sprint the next week and is implemented. So if it works, everybody's getting happier and feeling better every week. Now, unless you have psychological safety, people are not going to open up. And you know, we can spend a lot, that's probably enough for right now, but we can spend a lot of time talking about that. It's fundamental to making Scrum work.
Hi, Jed. George here. I noticed all these specialized roles that you presented today, like the Scrum Master. And actually, my question has two parts. I remembered in your book, you mentioned at some point that you were watching how Toyota was operating at the time. And I think there is a phrase somewhere that says, if an engineer was really experienced, he could play the product owner and the Scrum Master all at the same time.
Yes.
So, having watched this today, I was wondering, A, do you still believe that can be done in how modern things work? So, and two, if these roles that you present need to be dedicated, or a Scrum Master can play the role of a Scrum Master at the same time?
Okay, so going back to the origins of the first question, if you read the book, The Machine That Changed the World, it was the first book about Toyota. In there it describes how Taiichi Ohno studied Ford, General Motors, came back to Toyota and said that assembly line specialists along the line won't work for us. We're going to create cross-functional teams where everybody learns everybody else's job. We're going to get rid of the managers that they have at General Motors. We're going to have a facilitative team leader that knows how to do all the jobs and can actually help and coach the implementation. And today at Toyota, that's pretty much how it works on the assembly line. In fact, they typically will change, they'll swap jobs around every 2 hours just to keep everybody interested in, so everybody knows everything. They're all full stack developers. How many full stack developers do we have in here? You know, that's the true Scrum, where everybody's full stack. And the Scrum Master is actually helping implement. So in the early days when I implement Scrum, that's the way I implemented teams. And the teams that I have in my company, all the Scrum Masters are like that. They're working backlog as well as being Scrum Masters. The Scrum Master was designed, the role was designed to be part-time, and in fact, the better the team is, the less work the Scrum Master has to do. And conversely, on the product owner side, as the team gets better and better and goes faster and faster, the work of the product owner expands until it's very quickly a full-time job. So I guess your question was, does it work and do I still believe it? Yeah, I'm still implementing it that way. Now that doesn't mean it can't work with a Scrum Master that, you know, we have many product owners that have no coding experience, and now many of those are Scrum Masters as companies have transitions, and many of them are great Scrum Masters. But they can run 2 teams. They could be a Scrum Master and a Scrum Master. I found that the best Scrum Master, though, are people who actually have some management experience, because in order to ship a product in a company with many teams like that, they need to twist the arms of all the managers of the company and get them to cooperate. So I usually like to have a little more senior person that I will train as a Scrum Master. Train them to be a facilitative leader, but they know how to deal with the organization. They know, they're not complaining we don't have any leadership that's helping us. They're the leadership that's helping. So yeah, so that it does work, but it can work either way, either model.
Hi, Jeff.
Yeah.
Firstly, congratulations on your new book, of course. You mentioned a little while earlier that you and Ken are updating the Scrum Guide to change development team to just say team. Do you see that a similar change can happen in the Agile Manifesto as well, where it says, emphasizes working software specifically?
Well, today I would say working product, not working software, because it can be anything, product to service. You have people writing laws in the Parliament, I think, maybe with Scrum. But the Agile Manifesto won't change. We've already had that discussion many times. It's a historical document that is what it is. And we had a 10-year reunion in 2011, Agile 2011, and we had about 2,000 people in the room for 2 hours at night. And at the end, they said, would you change it? And Ron Jeffries spoke for us. He said, no, we wouldn't change a word of it. He said, I might put a line at the bottom that says, working software every sprint. We really mean it. So, yeah. So the Scrum Guide is evolving. The Scale Guide is evolving even faster. But the Agile Manifesto is a historical document that will be stable forever, as far as I can tell, because no one of us wants to change a word.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's a very interesting talk. I come from a bit left of field. I come from the aerospace engineering domain, so a bit back from your roots, where safety and regulation drives the architecture and the product, but more and more you see software adding value to the product. So the difficulty there, the week that you have, is the architecture constraints the ability to deliver the product.
Yes.
Do you have any observations at that point?
Yes, one of our favorite clients is the Saab Technologies that builds the Saab Gripen. And they use Scrum. They do 3-week sprints. We've actually written a case study with them where the program manager has worked with us and described. The plane is always flying. They're always upgrading it. The pilots are co-located with the teams. A test can be turned around in the air in 45 minutes. They laugh at people. People say, how do you do Scrum and hardware? They say, for the airplane, all hardware is software. Everything runs in simulation before it's manufactured. It's totally software driven, and it's totally driven by Scrum. And in response to your concerns about architecture, they say we petitioned the architecture because there's only 10 to 15% of it that requires very strict safety regulation. The other 85% we can iterate just like a normal Scrum team. So the fact that we can have a upgraded version of the airplane every sprint, and we can ship a completely new version of the plane every 6 months, and we can ship it at a cost that's 20% of the cost of our competition, and Aviation Week says it's the best fighter airplane in the world. The reason for that is Scrum, and we have solved the problem that you're talking about.
So my own observation is high fidelity models that allow you to get your digital twin before you actually connect to metal.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not only that part, but there was a great interview by a news reporter who was interviewing the head of marketing who had been a test pilot, and saying, well, the way I understand it, your plane is built like an iPad. It's basically a series of software downloads. you can upload new mission software at will. And he describes how that works, and that's true. It's just like the Tesla. Okay, every week or two, the Tesla downloads an upgrade or even a completely new operating system. So that's the way the planes are going to be built. That's the way they are built at Saab, and we have been talking to both F-35, F-22 people. All of them want to figure out how to move in this direction. It's a big shift, yeah.
I think you alluded to it in your talk, but what's your opinion on SAFE and the Scale Agile framework?
Well, SAFE is very popular, and it has a really cool marketing strategy because it's safe. And everybody still has a job. They have a role for everyone.
What about less?
Less is based on the Scrum Guide, as is Nexus, so it's a proper Scrum implementation. SAFE tweaks the Scrum Guide in ways that are going to make it less efficient. So that's another challenge with it. But I just did 2 days of training. My co-trainer for Scrum at Scale is one of the leading SAFE fellows in the world. So we're working together. And he's using Scrum at Scale as the harness for a major project where the implementations are in SAFE, they're in less. The sets of teams can use whatever they want. But Scrum at Scale is the operating system for running all of that. So Scrum at Scale is something different than SAFE, less, Nexus, DAD. They're all IT focused. Scrum at Scale is organizationally focused. My wife ran churches with Scrum for years, okay, using the Scrum at Scale model. Some of what the venture capitalists figured out, they figured out by watching the churches. How did that work? Okay, so it's a really different thing than a IT framework.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Following your comment that it's still safe and everybody still have a job. So as a Scrum Master, are we meant to work as a part of the team? When you're with a team, you're self-organizing and a high-performing team. Are we meant to leave the team and go to another team and leave the team to continue on their own, or we still stay with the team? Because sometimes if you try to...
Are you asking, should a Scrum Master be sitting with the team?
Yeah.
Yes. The answer is yes. It works best with a Scrum Master.
Even when they are high-performing.
What's that?
Even when they are high-performing team?
Yes. One of the things that people, really high-performing teams are running at 10 times normal speed, which is what Scrum was designed for, are like a jet fighter aircraft. That has automated systems that are subtly adjusting the plane to keep it in the air, and the plane will not stay in the air without that subtle adjustment. So one of these high-performing planes can spin out really easy if that, slight control system, those slight touches. And these high-performing teams need a Scrum Master that knows how to do that. Doesn't get involved, but just pushes, gently in a certain direction, maybe even with a look causes shifted behavior. Because I've seen a number of really high-performing teams crash and burn. You take away the Scrum Master that got them up there, then all of a sudden the team spins in. You got to be really careful with that.
Hello.
Yes. Wait, him first? Okay.
Jeff, I came to you 9 years ago as a command and control project manager, and I just came to see to prove that Scrum didn't work, and you taught me different. You taught me, I came with a project plan for a one-year project that I was working on, and Jeff looked at my plan and said, Carl, that's one of the best plans I've ever seen, and go away and take that as your next project management job, and you'll get the job. And as I walked away, I was rolling up this big plan that we had on the table. He said to me, but your plan is doomed to fail. And he tore it apart like I would tear apart a Gantt chart today. So, moving forward, I've gone forward and I've taken my teams, the team we were working with on that occasion, they actually went ahead and we did that project as a Scrum project, Scrum product development, I should say. We went and won 2 UK IT Industry Awards on the same night with this product, and we won a lot of other product prizes as well. So, coming forward to today, I've seen many teams actually achieve twice the work in half the time. I've actually seen it, and I was one of these people that didn't believe that Scrum worked, and I went to this guy to prove that he was wrong and that Scrum was some kind of cult. Actually, it does work, but it only works if you follow the principles that Jeff actually teaches. And that's what I've done. Today, I've probably worked with about over 100 Scrum teams in different organisations, including my own. Every single one has run 1 week sprints, and it actually works.
That is awesome, because 1 week sprints will deliver more faster, you get better learning cycles, the quality is better, but the only company I've been able to go totally to 1 week sprints is 3M. Now I got company number 2.
There's a lot more besides.
That's awesome.
But I just wanted to say that I'm seeing a lot of misconceptions with people when they come to scale Scrum. They are actually trying to scale dysfunction. They're scaling from the top and they're forgetting the people at the bottom. You've got to make sure that your teams are actually working well and following the discipline. Scrum is actually a discipline, and we often forget that. We think it's a nice, soft, cuddly way of working, but it's a discipline, and we often forget that. So really, what I wanted to ask you, Jeff, is I'm working with a number of large organisations at the moment, and I'm finding that they're looking at other well-known scaling methods because they are kind of safe. And I'd just like to know how we can actually get this message across that we need to do things differently. We need to do things well. You know, we need to actually look at some diligence in the way that we work to actually get this working. How can we sell Scrum at scale over and above these methods of dysfunctional scaling that we're seeing more of?
Well, you know, my goal is to do what I can, and I booted up 100 Scrum at Scale trainers, and maybe by the end of next year we'll have 100 more. So I'm doing what I can, but at the end of the day, the companies that do Scrum well will win. So the longevity of scaled implementations that don't work, they're not going to last. And we're already seeing some major transformations that have already gone on 10 years ago, but now they need to go faster. They did get some improvement with early frameworks, but nowhere near twice the work in half the time. And so now they're implementing Scrum. Some of the biggest companies in the world are now moving to Scrum at scale so they can up their, and what they tell me is the early frameworks were the right thing for them when they needed training wheels to get going. But now that they're facing more and more fierce competitive pressure, they need to significantly up their game with Scrum. And Scrum at scale is a good tool to use it, to do it. So, you guys want to stay around all night asking questions?
We'll go for 2 more questions. There seems to be an appetite for it. Rob?
Thank you. Cheers, thank you. Jeff, thanks for the insightful talk. Just over here.
Okay.
So what I wanted to ask was about agile leadership. So you did talk about the difference between waterfall and agile leadership and how this makes a difference in terms of delivering the success of it. But something that I see often is that the use of story points and the views of story points. So I just wanted to ask you, what's your opinion of story points to be used as a vehicle to show progress, and your opinion of no estimates? So.
Well, one of the things I've always done when I've run engineering in 11 companies over time, and the first day when I come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, the first thing I do is get rid of timesheets. Now, why would I do that? I was talking to the senior leadership of a big IBM company here in Europe, and we were doing a workshop. And I said to them, you know, at the end of the week, if developers have timesheets, they're trying to fill them out, and they have these codes, they have to put stuff in, hours for certain projects and stuff like that, and it never fits. And so they have to lie in their timesheet. And so at 5 o'clock Friday afternoon, they're really upset about this. And they leave early. And I say, that undermines productivity. So, and I asked them, how much do you think you're losing in productivity at IBM across thousands of people because of the timesheet? They said 15%. So I said, well, then clearly you're going to eliminate them. And they said, oh, no, we couldn't do that. So timesheets are kind of like cigarettes. They always give you lung cancer, but people have a hard time giving them up. So for estimating projects, you have to think about where did those points come from. In the 1940s, the RAND Corporation was given a few $1 million by the Department of Defense to figure out how to estimate big, complex defense tactical projects. And the first thing the scientists came back to them, they said, don't use hours. Why don't you want to use hours? What do they say? Why not? The error rate is really, really high, and the variability between experts is really, really wide. And if you use relative size estimation, you get much more accurate estimation, particularly in the early phases of the product. And Microsoft has done a study, that an IEEE award-winning paper, showing that while the traditional project at the beginning, where if you're doing a fixed price project, you estimate everything, the error at the beginning is 400%. Using points, the error is no more than 50%. It's 8 times better. Not only that, to get those points, we benchmark it in many companies. The first one that we actually got really good data initially was a telecom company. We took specs that had been implemented by waterfall people. We had a brand new Scrum team that had never seen the spec, gave it to them. Some of the waterfall people are watching, and in 10 minutes they estimated that spec, and the waterfall people were stunned. They said, it took us 8 hours, and they got a better answer in 10 minutes. So points are 50 times faster. The third aspect of this is a big defense contractor went from points, and they came to me and they said, the developers are happier with points. Now this is really important because the research shows happier people are more productive. So the points are making them more productive. So we don't have time to go into the details of why they were happier, but you get more productivity, more accurate estimates. You can do it 50 times as fast. And people doing big contracts, big consultancies, can make a bid at 20% of the cost of a waterfall bid for a fixed price project. So they could do 5 bids while a competition does 1. And when they can deliver at half price. So for all these reasons, you know, time is like the Gantt chart. It's an old tool that is inappropriate for modern technology. And I've just listed some of the reasons. And if getting better estimates, getting them faster, reducing the cost of estimation, and having happier people doing the estimation, if that's not enough to get you off timesheets, I understand. Giving up cigarettes is really hard. Timesheets are like that. So maybe we need to develop a rehabilitation clinic for people that can't give up their timesheets. New business opportunity.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
I think I snuck in as the last one. So something I'm interested in is obviously we're now trying to do this in our company and try and have more strong teams and that scalability. I just wondered if you had any advice for when we've got those cross-functional teams where there perhaps is one person across 2 or 3 teams. So for us, like designers, maybe across 2 or 3 teams. How do they be involved with all of those Scrum teams and division their time, or is that just a terrible idea and it's better that each individual person is part of a singular team?
So while it is true that people need to help, like I'm on a Scrum team, and every sprint, every other team wants me to help them, and every customer wants me to do something for them. But I have a product owner who sorts all those requests, prioritizes them, and then I work her list. How much time do you think that saves me? How much more productive do you think that makes me? At least 4 times. Now, Rally has a survey they did of 60,000 teams. And what it showed is that if you have one person, one team, they get twice as many stories done as if they have to be on 2 teams. And if you go to 3 teams, it gets even worse. So you don't want people to go in all these extra meetings. That's just extra overhead, it's extra slowdown, it's extra confusion. So in my company, which runs completely about Scrum, the principle is one person, one team. Everybody's on one team. No matter who they have to support. And I have to support all the teams. And why? You can't get twice the work in half the time with people on multiple teams. It will never happen. So.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happens at the moment. We've got collections of people that are just running around, too many ceremonies, too many meetings, and the work is less.
They're going to meetings, they're not getting anything done. So a fundamental Agile principle is that you move backlog to stable teams. And a project is a set of backlog that the product owners are moving to a stable team. And it may flow across teams. The old way of working is we have a project and we go around and we steal as many people as we can to work on the project. So we throw people at against projects. And you wind up with people working on 5 projects. What does the data show? The loss is, what percent of time is lost for a person working on 5 projects? It's 80% in the charts, right? So why would you throw away 80% of a valuable designer's time by putting them on 5 things at once? Makes no sense. Scrum is all data-driven. It's all math. I'm a professor of mathematics. It's not an Agile opinion. It's a calculation. And this is one of them. The data is in the textbooks. You can go look at it. Then you can do your own experiment. We have nice little exercises that in 10 minutes you can duplicate the data in the textbooks. So you can easily perform your own experiment tomorrow to validate what I'm saying. So. Another thing is teams. Let me make a pitch for small teams. The Scrum Guide says 3 to 9, and Ken wants to say it needs to be less than 10. And I'm saying, Ken, we don't allow teams of 9 in our company because they're too slow. And the professor at Harvard that studied teams for 20 years, he figured out the optimal team size was, on the average, 4.6, so either 4 or 5 people. And we've repeated that experiment in our company. We've tested it. Okay, how well does the 4 or 5 people work? What happens if you go to 6? Slows down slightly. What happens if you go to 7? Noticeable slowdown. What happens if you go to 8? Starts to be really painful in the daily meeting. Everybody can't speak up. So we've said, at 8, we split. This is based on daily research with real teams. And every time we split a team of 8 into 2 teams of 4, the velocity goes up at least 30%. Over and over and over. So you need to do your own experiments, and you need to follow your own data, and not listen to all the Agile BS out there. Right? So small teams, one person, one team, no hours, all these things are really important to get high performance. You have to deal with these issues.
How do you tackle in an organization where they've got multiple regulatory deadlines and they are not movable, and the regulator expect you having to show them a plan how you're going to get there? And
so the plan is, the question is, how do you meet multiple deadlines? Well, first of all, that's a product owner's problem. The product owner has to answer that question. So let me give you an example. My last company where I was CTO, we were deploying 4 major hospitals every sprint, the biggest ones in the United States. And the product owner would come in, in backlog refinement before the sprint started. He would be laying out, for every hospital we have a contract. For every contract there are at least 12 major projects. For the 12 major projects for each of 4 customers, 48 projects, here's the backlog for those 48 projects. In terms of the priority of those projects, here's what it is, here's the backlog. Teams, are you ready? They all say yes. They pushed a button and it was injected into the Scrum tooling. Then the teams went to work. But they really focused on trying to do the most important, swarming on the most important things. So for short periods of time, they were really focused, not working on 5 things, but working on 1 thing. And then they would go to the next thing. And so they're really careful about the way they work the backlog to stay focused. And that's how you can do 48 projects in 1 sprint at really high speed. You minimize the context switching by the way you work. The product owner is clear about the ordering, and the teams are clear about swarming on that ordering and trying to get things done, like as fast as possible, focus on 1 thing, get it done, then the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. If they worked on everything at once, they would be like your situation. We have 42 projects, so we have 42 projects we're all working on at once, and everybody's working on 5 or 10 of them, and nothing's getting done. And then it takes a year instead of a sprint to deliver. So all these things are a trade-off and a way. It's all about focusing. It's all about how you manage backlog, how the team picks up the backlog.
I kind of don't want to get in the way between you and Jeff, so any questions?
Thank you.